This is the Bounce Back Generation podcast. I'm Jennifer Dillon. Today, we're going to talk about cannabis and answer some questions that I know I had when I was younger, and I still have, even though I don't use anymore because, like many people, it makes me paranoid. But there's a lot of questions that are coming up about cannabis now that it's legal and a lot of young people use. So we don't want to ignore that fact. We want to give anyone who uses as many tools as possible to understand what does it do to your brain and your body. What do you do if you have a bad experience? What do you do when you're not sure how much to take of some of the new products? What if you want to be in the industry? You think it's an interesting career? We think when you give information to people, they make better choices. An interesting fact is that cannabis was legalized in California a few years ago. And with that legalization became more open conversation about it. And the California Department of Public Health has found that since legalization, teens and young adults are actually using weed less. So there's something to giving people the power of information. And here to do that is expert on cannabis, Sara Payan. Sara Payan is a nationally recognized and award-winning educator, policy advocate, and strategic consultant with over a decade of experience in the cannabis industry. She's the host of the top-rated podcast, Planted with Sara Payan. She engages with celebrities, policymakers, and industry leaders to explore the evolving cannabis landscape. She is committed to safe access and serves as the vice chair of the California Cannabis Advisory Committee, and she's been named one of the 100 most important women in cannabis. I have a little anecdote that I want to start us off with. And, we work with young people, and our program manager, Shamp Kell, was working with a teenager. He was probably 16 or 17 years old. And she asked him, what do you do? Or where do you go? Or who do you talk to when you're feeling bad, when you're down, you need someone to talk to? And he said very clearly, my weed. And it was funny, at the time we, as a team, we all laughed. I was like, oh, ha ha, that's funny. But, I really think about that. Like as a non-user, I don't use cannabis. Like explain to me how it helps on an emotional level for folks.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of things it can do because it affects mood. When we talk about psychoactivity, we're not we're not talking about euphoria per se. We're talking about a change in mindset. So there are also non-euphoric ways to support mood too. Like a little bit of THC can give a lift in mood. A lot of THC can actually make you tired. Cannabis is biphasic, so small amounts and large amounts have different effects. But it also can help with things like anxiety, especially when you're looking at things that have CBD or CBG, which are both cannabinoids that are part of the plant. Those can help lower anxiety without creating euphoric effects. THC can do that too, especially in smaller amounts. As you start to get into higher amounts, sometimes they can actually exacerbate anxiety. And I know, like, for myself, I was a precocious teen, and when I have conversations about youth access to cannabis, I don't condone it because they're young minds and they're developing, but there's also, like, I know for myself, I came from a chaotic home. And so when I tried it, it did actually calm things down, and I had no idea, because I was born into that chaos, how much anxiety I had stored up in my body until I had tried it, and actually my body felt what it was like to be calm.
Mm.
That being said, I think it, shouldn't be an alternative to having, like, a trusted adult or a safe place to go.
Yeah, no, for sure. And, it just shows that's something that's missing for a lot of kids. They don't have someone to turn to. And for a lot of the kids, they just don't have that process. They don't know how to form those kinds of relationships or have those conversations.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what happens that you can talk about in your brain and the difference between maybe a 17-year-old using and then a 30-year-old, for example. What would be the kind of differences that would happen?
Well, the brain is developing until now there is research that shows that we have neuroplasticity throughout our entire lives. But especially in those years, in the as a youth, through the teen, through early 20s, our brains are still rapidly developing. And that's not to say like I've worked with parents and their children and their physicians with, medical issues and using medical cannabis and as a medicinal alternative to pharmaceuticals that may have, harsher side effects. It's very useful. But I think, there's also the conversation that you have around youth access and harm reduction and you do have some people who are mature enough to not use it all the time and they use it to just unwind and calm down. But I also think there's something to be said for a young mind that may just know that that signifies relief, and therefore they may not they may develop an unhealthy relationship with cannabis. And there's some mindfulness that's involved with that. And I think that that's where maturity comes in too. And also, if somebody's coming from a place of pain and it's the relief that they know, it's kind of like how we can have with other substances as well. Even, for some of us, we can have that with food too, because you
Mm.
get that comfort from it. And it's creating that balance and being just really mindful about whatever we put in our bodies creates a reaction. And how can we have a healthy relationship with that?
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about addiction in a minute, but I want to delve a little bit more into that kind of anxiety, and then
Yeah.
some of the worst things that some people are starting to talk about that can be triggered in a young person's brain. Just because I don't use cannabis now doesn't mean I didn't at some point in my life. But like a lot of people I know, I stopped because I would get anxiety attacks.
Yeah.
And so what do you know, like, why is that? Why does that like all you can use it for years and it's great. And then boom, all of a sudden you just like every time I use it, I feel like paranoid and the world's after me and I don't know who I am. And I'm hearing myself talk about the fact that I'm hearing myself talk and you just like, it's the worst.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're walking chemistry experiments, and our endocannabinoid system is directly connected to our nervous system. So there's a lot that comes into play. As we age, our reaction changes. For us, especially as women, even through our monthly cycles, our reaction changes. When when we go through menstruation, we're actually not as sensitive to THC as when we ovulate. So there's a lot of things
Interesting.
that come into play. And for people like you and I think we're of a similar age. Back in the day, you got what you got. Like you didn't know what the cultivar was, what the
True.
components were. And I know for myself, I had something, I think it was, like, early in college that made me extraordinarily anxious, and I thought, "Well, you know what? This probably isn't for me, and I need to stop using it." And then when I revisited it later when I was older and had access to a dispensary, there were lots of different types to use, and they all had different feels because there are these components in cannabis. There's cannabinoids, but there's also terpenes, and these are the molecules that create scent and flavor in all plants. But in cannabis and in other botanicals, they also create a spectrum of feel. Like, for example, linalool is a terpene that we find in some cannabis cultivars, but it's also what gives the relaxing feel to lavender. Or myrcene,
Oh,
which is a
interesting.
sleepier terpene, which is also prominent in hops. And that's why when we look at like old folk remedies for help with sleep, sleeping with a hops pillow is something people would do because the myrcene actually creates that drowsiness. And just a little trivia, hops and cannabis come from the same family, Cannabaceae. So
Uh-huh.
there's stuff that goes on with that, and then, there's when do my classes, I always talk about creating, finding the appropriate ratio at the smallest volume that creates a desired reaction in the body, but also having the conversation, excuse me, that even though we create our own endogenous cannabinoids, because we actually for mothers out there who have breastfed, you actually are giving your endogenous cannabinoids to your child through your milk. You're giving anandamide. Not all of us tolerate phytocannabinoids or the cannabinoids that we find in plants, and the biggest message around that is, and that's okay, because
Mhm.
some of us need a little extra. There's actually been some studies on the fact that some of us, our endocannabinoid system or our endocannabinoids, the tone isn't there. And so having extra cannabinoids in our body actually creates balance because our endocannabinoid system or ECS is all about creating a homeostasis throughout our body.
Okay, so what is a cannabinoid and an endocannabinoid? And then just for people, homeostasis is your body always wants to find balance, doesn't
That's
want to
right.
go too much one way or the other. So yeah, what is a cannabinoid and why do I have it?
Yeah.
Or an endocannabinoid? Yeah, what does it do?
So what we think is that, going back in history, that cannabis is probably we probably have one of the oldest symbiotic cultivation relationships with cannabis. And we don't know if it found us or we found it. But, when we use the slang term weed, it's actually quite apt because it will grow anywhere, everywhere. Now, how well it grows is another thing altogether, but it will grow. And so we found a lot of archaeological evidence that people were using it, for psychoactive effects, for ritual things,
Mm,
for creating rope and different things like that. There's been burial mounds where it's been included, especially with like medicine people and things like that. Um, but it's so a cannabinoid is a chemical compound in cannabis, and we do have, and the ones that we create in our bodies are called endocannabinoids because it's inside of us.
mhm, okay.
Cannabinoids that we find in plants are, we call them, in regular terminology, cannabinoids, but they would be categorized as phytocannabinoids because those are coming from plants. So it's part of the compounds that create the cannabis plant, and that combined with things like terpenes, what I mentioned before, the molecules that create scent and flavor in all plants. And then, there's flavonoids and actually here's the thing, and this is why I love my work. We're learning new things every day. We're discovering new I can't even talk today. Cannabinoids every day and learning more things about the different components of the plant and how they work together. Because as we've seen with, modern pharmacology, they have actually isolated THC, or as we actually refer to it as delta 9 THC, to make things like Marinol. And
What's
it's
that? What's Marinol?
so Marinol was something that was actually developed during the AIDS crisis, and it was helping people eat and helping with appetite because they knew that THC
Mhm,
was helpful for that. That was actually the thing that saved a lot of young men's lives during that time, especially here in the Bay, where we had a lot of young men walking around looking much older, and
mm.
there
I
was,
remember that. Mhm,
yeah, and, there were a lot of people whose loved ones were putting themselves in danger by trying to acquire cannabis to help them eat, because one of the biggest things with HIV was wasting syndrome.
mm.
So to be able to get nutrients in your body and for your body to be able to support itself was a really big thing. So, the pharmacy, the big pharma decided to, develop a synthesized version of it. One, because of the scheduling of cannabis, because it's a Schedule One drug, which means that the government sees absolutely no medicinal value to it.
That's insane. I I
Well,
I just find that crazy.
it is, and if you dig into it, it's a study on stigma that was formed because of, well, we'd be going back quite a ways, and actually it has Bay Area roots because our own William Randolph Hearst has a lot to do with that.
Oh,
Um, yeah,
why? Because
so
his daughter was using or something, and he's like, "Ah,
no, it was about money. So it was
no."
about greed and it was about racism.
Oh, yeah, the underpinnings of you American
Exactly,
story.
exactly. Because
Right.
you had after Prohibition, Harry Anslinger was talking about, and he is a government official, he was talking about how, you know, cannabis wasn't harmful, that there was no harm in it at all. But here's the thing, after Prohibition, they needed something to do, and he was actually married to a DuPont, and the DuPonts had their plastics that were coming out, and hemp was a direct competitor to those plastics.
Mm,
Also, hemp was a direct competitor to lumber. And what did William Randolph Hearst do besides create wars with his newspapers? He was a lumber baron.
mm.
Also, they were using it to create social distortion, saying that, you know, they called it marijuana instead of cannabis because it actually cannabis was part of, your doctor's pharmacopoeia. For years back, they were using it to treat coughs, epilepsy, all sorts of things. Um, but they ended up creating all this stigma so that doctors didn't realize that it was actually being challenged until it was too late because they called it cannabis and they were calling it marijuana, which is because of,
Yeah, racially, like, oh, it's this exotic, Mexican thing or terrible
exactly.
drug that's coming across the border to harm our children. And
Right, and it was also very
yeah.
racist against Black folks
Oh,
because saying that, there is a quote, and I'm not even gonna try to quote it correctly. I should have written it down, but basically, saying that it made Black men feel like they were equal and that they would,
mm.
fraternizing with white women, and so it was this whole, like,
Oh, they go and listen to jazz and, smoke a joint together, and then all hell breaks loose. All right. There goes your white patriarchy. Yeah.
exactly, and so they started taxing it and eventually made it illegal, but then what really did a lot of harm as well is during the Nixon administration. Nixon basically, the war on drugs didn't start with the Reagans, it started with Nixon. And
Mm.
that's when policies really changed and people started going to jail because of cannabis. And, therefore we had a lot of people, a lot of Black and brown people and a lot of free thinkers going to jail. And how convenient is that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking that this kind of, you get them coming in and going out because you're going to stop them from having this calming, way to live life and to address, stress. And then you're going to throw them in jail for using and look at the outcome decades later of how many Black kids, mostly Black boys and men, have ended up spending the rest of their lives in jail for carrying a few ounces or
Absolutely.
dealing, to the community. And it's a huge, as somebody who works in public housing, it's a really big um, social and emotional calming effect. That's the weed. My weed is what's keeping me going, and I mean, it's just so wrong in so many different ways. Let me go back to something you said about the plot, like the DuPonts and hemp. Is it possible to replace plastics with hemp products?
Yes, very much so. Actually, Henry Ford built an entire car made out of hemp.
Really?
Yeah.
So are there companies that are now creating, kind of hemp alternatives?
Yes. Yes, their hemp plastics are being used. There are actually some cannabis companies that use hemp plastic for their packaging. It's a little bit expensive right now because it's still working on being built to scale, but it's not, this isn't your friend on the hates hemp necklace anymore. I mean, we know that it can be made for clothes, but there are guitars being made out of it. There are homes being made out of it. There's actually a gentleman who lives in the Southwest who has a home that's completely built out of hemp because his child had environmental sensitivities. And every summer, he invites parents and their children who have environmental sensitivities to come spend time there.
Wow.
It's
So
really
is it a fully kind of organic product that would break down at some point, that it's not like plastics where you're going to, have the microplastics in your body and it's going to be in the fish and the oceans and all of that?
Yeah,
Oh.
absolutely, absolutely. And actually talking about, breaking down, one of the things with cannabis is that we know, and they always say, oh, there's not enough research. Well, there actually is quite a bit of research. And our relationship with cannabis going through millennia is also proof of the fact that nobody's ever died from using too much cannabis. There is no harm from the cannabis plant itself. There are things that we need to take into consideration. Mold, mildews, fungus,
Mm.
pesticides that it's grown with. Cannabis is an amazing bioaccumulator. Whether we're calling it hemp or cannabis, it's the same plant. So it's really efficient at leaching toxins out of the soil and out of the air. So where it's grown around and grown in is incredibly important too. They actually went and planted hemp in Chernobyl to
Oh,
clean soil.
no
So,
kidding. Hmm.
when we look at like a lot of the hemp products that are available now, that's why we need to have better regulations, better controls around how that's tested and what it's grown with, because unlike cannabis, which is actually too highly regulated in many ways, hemp is not. So if you want to make sure that if you are getting hemp products, you know who's doing it, that
Mm,
those certificates are available, because you want to know that it's safe. You want to know
yeah.
that, it wasn't grown in an area like in toxic soil, or, what pesticides are being used, or what is it grown around, because it's just such an efficient cleaner of its environment, and it will take everything in.
That's really interesting. Well, hopefully, with California and some other states legalizing it, that's an industry that part of the industry is growing to kind of use it as an environmental or as a green product. No pun intended, but green product. Um, but I think I want to go back to something you were talking about earlier. Is just the cannabinoids and the endocannabinoids, and that there may be some people that don't tolerate it, and maybe that's part of the use of it for a young person or anybody, is just understanding how your body may be looking at or accepting it, or processing it differently than someone else.
Yeah.
Um, I know someone who their son, when he uses, he goes into psychosis. So he has this kind of cannabis induced psychosis. Another young person who did a little piece for us about her experience with I think it's called cannabis hypermesis, where she would
Oh,
throw up all the time, she was away in college, didn't know why she was having stomach aches and throwing up all the time. And at some point, it went to the emergency room because the stomach aches got so bad, and she couldn't stop throwing up. And the only thing that would make her feel better was to smoke. And she went to the emergency room, and it just happened that the doctor there, and she'd seen many doctors before. They were trying to figure, oh my God, do you have cancer? Do you have all this? And the doctor at the emergency room said, "Do you smoke weed?" And and the young lady said, "Yes, I do." And the doctor said, "Well, just try this. Try quitting and see if you feel better." And it was a night and day thing. As soon as she quit, she started to feel better, and she hasn't smoked since because she just can't tolerate it. That's what happens for her.
yeah, that's very real. I mean, cannabis hyperemesis is real, and there will be people who will refute that it is, and unfortunately, a lot of those people are in my industry and movement,
Mm,
and we have to have really balanced conversations about it. Because I remember, I think it was back in 2013, one of my dearest friends that I grew up with, she's a physician in Colorado, and at the time she was working in the ER, and she called me and she's like, "Have you seen this? I'm having a lot of young men who are coming in with cyclical vomiting that is only being soothed by hot showers. And the one thing that they all have in common
yes.
is that they smoke a lot of cannabis." And at the time, I hadn't seen it. And now, as we're having more conversations and legalization has happened and more people are trying it, we're also learning other things about the way people react. But there are people who have these reactions, and we still don't know what it is.
Mhm.
There are some scientists wonder if we have, a third receptor in our ECS, like, because we know we have CB1 receptors and CB2 receptors, but perhaps we have, an additional receptor. Other people have, hypothesized that it's something that's being used with during the growth process of the plant itself.
Mm.
Um, but we really aren't sure. All we know is that, especially for people who are heavy users, this
Yeah.
is happening.
Well,
So
it is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say they're still trying to get to the bottom of it, but if somebody is going through that, obviously they gotta stop. They have to stop using it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I do wonder with, kind of the negative side of legalization is the increase in the commercialization and the profit, and and so there may be a lot of shortcuts being taken, or just, mass production that is including, like you mentioned, pesticides or things like that. One of my brothers is, I mean, I always joke that he's basically a Rasta because he smokes so much. I mean, it's just such a part of his life, and he grows his own, and he used to grow them for the dispensary. So he's an aficionado. He knows what he likes. He knows how to grow exactly what he wants. And I told him about this cannabis hypermesis, and he said, yeah, I've heard of this. I've never heard of it until now. So like something happened recently where it started to rise up. But I want to, I just like to understand the brain. So what is happening with the cannabinoid and the endocannabinoids? Is it like there's like they're meeting up, and that's triggering some kind of feeling that some dopamine or serotonin gets released, and that's what makes you feel good? Or what's like the science, the mechanism, the neurology of it?
So the receptors bind to THC, and that's what creates, the feel
I see.
throughout the body. Well, it's that, and it's also the terpene profile. So one thing that we've hypothesized about is, you know, how the cannabis is grown, like you said, but not so much about, you know, what's being used to grow with it. Well, yes and no. Not so much about fertilizers or pesticides, but there's also this thing around sun-grown cannabis versus indoor-grown cannabis, because
Oh.
sun-grown cannabis, when it's so a couple years ago on my podcast, I had a dear friend on who the New York Times refers to as the Wizard of Green, Phil Couturi, and he grows grapes. And so he is a pioneer in biodynamic and organic grape growing in Sonoma.
Mhm.
And we were talking about terroir. And
What's
part of
that?
so terroir is what the grapes go through in their growth cycle. So it's the weather, so it's heat, it's rain, it's wind. There are, also like pests, different things, because the plants express themselves in certain ways to defend themselves from the elements. So terpenes are actually some of the they're in some ways they're natural pesticides, some of them, for these
Mm.
plants that they'll express when they're stressed in certain ways. So you get a different reaction from these grapes. You get different grapes depending on the kind of stress that they're under. And stress isn't necessarily bad. It can actually create very flavorful, rich grapes.
Mm.
Well, the same thing happens with cannabis. So, if a plant is indoors where it never deals with any stress, and there's different types of lighting, and yes, I know some people say that they have lights that are the full spectrum of the sun, but I'm like, I do not buy that, because we really can't replicate nature. We aren't as omnipotent scientifically as we'd like to think that we are. There's something about the sun and dealing with the elements, that the expressions of the plants are very much more nuanced than they are
Mm.
when they're indoor. And so there may be something around that as well.
That's fascinating.
Is Yeah, so because we know that the terpene profiles of plants are very different when they're done outdoors. Also, some of the cannabinoids that are expressed as well. And I have over 20,000 hours of experience working with human beings in cannabis. I work with physicians and their patients. And the one thing that I've noticed is, if you isolate a cannabinoid, like if we're talking about Marinol, or a concentrate that just has the cannabinoid isolated, it tends to be not as effective in helping people with symptom management as a product that is derived from a full plant spectrum. So all the cannabinoids and terpenes that are naturally occurring in the plant are in that product. So there's a lot to dig into around it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. But I can't help but feel like, you know, the whole plant is such a friend to humanity. Even though I'm not a user and it makes me paranoid and all that, I see that there are so many elements about it, and from people I know who use, that
Mhm.
are so beneficial to us. And the fact that all of these benefits and detriments that could come up are not kind of allowed to kind of fully be out there in the world. It's just so interesting to me. And like the story that what you told about the Hearst and the DuPonts and the suppression of it. What do you think is like, let's just dip into politics for a second. What do you think is going to happen with the, Trump administration and this kind of very pious, supposedly pious, we're so good. We're good Christians. We don't do, certain things and drugs and stuff.
Yeah,
And well,
or is it do as I say, not as I do behind closed doors?
they're half of them are pedophiles. So I don't know. But
I
yeah,
mean,
what do you think is going to happen?
it's been really interesting. I've been talking to a lot of my friends that work in Washington and lots of colleagues. And with Getz not being, AG, everybody was
Mhm.
excited. Well, not everybody. There were people who were excited about that because he's very pro cannabis.
Right.
And, if we looked at his portfolio, he's probably done some investing. And so
Hmm.
they were thinking, oh, he's gonna, push through everything and everything's gonna be descheduled and it's gonna be beautiful. And I
Interesting.
also, yeah, and I also know that Roger Stone is a big fan of cannabis because his wife uses it medicinally.
Mm.
Um, that being said, Trump has stated through the years that he believes in the states making their own decisions about it. So I don't know that there's going to be a lot that's going to be done on a federal level. I just had Congresswoman Barbara Lee and Congressman Earl Blumenauer on the show, and they were the co-chairs of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus. They actually created it. And Earl has been doing cannabis policy now for over 50 years, and he does not use cannabis at all. He just understands that we need to get people out of jail and we need to have safe and sane ways that we're looking at this with a critical eye. And Barbara has always been about getting people out of jail, creating economic opportunities and destigmatizing. And also she's a big supporter of not rescheduling but descheduling cannabis to help with that.
Mm.
And when I spoke to them and asked them what's going to happen to the caucus after they leave, because they both aren't, they didn't run again. Earl is going to be going back to academia, although he's still going to be very active on the policy front. And I know Barbara, though she left her seat to run for the Senate, and she's still going to be very active. So keep an eye out for both of them. They're still fighting the good fight.
Good.
They said that, Congressman Blumenauer said that he's had some really good conversations with AOC and he feels very comfortable that there's going to be headway, but it's all kind of up in the air. I mean,
Yeah.
you're looking at politics. One of the things that makes me incredibly sad is that, for all of the great politicians that are out there that are actually doing their job and serving the people, we have a lot of people that are just, they won't work across the aisle. And
Mhm.
they just, argument for argument's sake and for posturing. And quite honestly, in some ways, I feel like for their own personal enrichment, politics is a very, very complicated space.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. Well, let's just focus on California where it is legal. If you were to advise, someone who's just graduating from high school or they're in college and they say, look, I really am interested in the whole industry and I want to be part of it. What are jobs that are available? Like you don't go to like Craigslist and see like, oh, cannabis is looking. I mean, there used to be where you could go and clip, right? And I
Oh,
don't see any of those jobs or anything anymore. Like where are the jobs?
well, you know why you're not seeing the jobs? Because you would if we had a healthy industry.
Oh.
The hardest thing right now is that we've been experiencing some major extinction events because it's very hard to do business in California in the cannabis industry. A lot of the large multi-state operators have left. And
Why? Why? That's interesting.
overtaxation is huge. The
Oh,
cost of entry is huge. Doing business in California in general, because it's a beautiful state. It's also a very expensive state to do business. That can be really hard. And even though we've passed, adult use cannabis, it's really up to the individual municipalities whether they're going to allow it in their communities or not. It's not across the board just because it passed.
Mm,
So there's a lot of challenges that are happening, and we have a lot of work to do as vice chair of the Cannabis Advisory Committee for the state. I see a lot of the pain about people who are, who have social equity licenses not being able to start up their businesses, things that we have, challenges that we have around testing. The fact that this was supposed to basically extinguish the illicit market, but when you go into a dispensary, things are not only expensive on the menu, but then when you check out, all these taxes that are piled on top of
mhm.
it makes people think, I'm just going to go back to my guy and get it. And that makes
Yeah.
it easier. So not only are sales falling, and then there's more competition because there are a lot of businesses, but then, part of that, the taxes goes towards enforcement as well. And then, the first year that we had legalization, the state was disappointed that did as much tax revenues that they thought they were going to. But as somebody who's on the ground floor, working as, I was the head of education for a group of dispensaries, I saw medical patients crying at the fact that they couldn't afford what they needed to get relief, or their favorite products were gone because the companies no longer existed, and that's what
Mm,
helped them. And they'd get really upset and they'd say, oh, the dispensaries are greedy, or oh, the brands are greedy. And I would say, no, look, this is where we need to have a conversation about how the cake is baked.
mm,
What you see on the menu, that is not the base price that's not the wholesale price for a product. Farmers at this point in time are getting around $4 an eighth. Eighths are going for much more than that. So
mhm.
it's not only the markup from the stores, which has to happen because they need to make a profit, but there's an excise tax, 15%, that's added to the cost of the product every time it changes hands. So
Mm.
you have a cultivator when it goes to distribution, because it's not like it was back in the medicinal days where the farmers actually would come to the stores and sell their products. It has to go through distribution, much like alcohol. There's a 15% tax that's added to that. 15% when it goes to the dispensary, and then 15% when
Wow.
it's to the consumer. On top of that, you have sales tax. And in certain places, especially like here in Berkeley and Oakland, there are sales taxes that are added to that on top of it. So you could be paying up to 40% of your purchase could be a tax.
Well, more than that, because every time you get taxed, you raise the price and now your percentage is higher. That's crazy. And where's the tax money going? I get grants from some of these taxes. Like there's a 1 cent soda tax, which has generated a ton of money, and it goes to the departments of public health. And we've received some of those funds to then do things around health and nutrition and all that. Where's the cannabis tax money?
Well, it's going to a lot of places, but a few of the places I can tell you about is, 20% was promised to law enforcement, which at the time I thought was very interesting because I understood that it was being promised to get support, but we were supposed to be giving them an easier time with having less law.
Less right. You don't have to stop and frisk somebody because weed comes. They shouldn't be driving and smoking, but yes, I get
No,
the
it shouldn't
like.
be.
Yeah, don't drive and smoke,
Don't drive in this.
or use a gummy or whatever. But yeah, that's right. But it's to buy support, of
Right,
course. Yeah,
absolutely, and then some of it is going to research, and, some of that research is, about why cannabis is bad. So it's very
yeah,
interesting. We're actually paying for research that works against
yeah.
us, but I would rather have it be towards unbiased research that sees both the positive and the negative, because
Sure.
they are both there. We have to
Yes.
be really cognizant of that. Um, and the fact of the matter is, like, Colorado's had some great programs with their taxes where it's helped support education and different things. But when we're looking at this, it's not a panacea. Like, there shouldn't be sin taxes on this industry. Like, if we're going to tax, we should be taxing across the board for all industries to help support our communities, have better schools, have better roads, support, our unhoused community members, help with mental health programs. It it it's not that cannabis shouldn't be taxed. It should be taxed fairly, and we're seeing a lot of what I would consider sin taxes or stigma taxes that are actually making it really hard for, this industry to survive. And the fact of the matter is, you could have a lot there are a lot of entrepreneurs out there that could benefit by taking part in the industry, and that money and those jobs would stay in these communities.
Right.
And
Right.
that's really important. So there are actually some great, programs at universities that you can go to, like, I taught at City College, and they have some good programs. Northern Michigan University, Lake Superior State, they both have programs. There
What
is
do you study in the programs? Like the business side of it or the science or the marketing or
different things. There's, like, the master's program, that's in Maryland is around pharmacology, and
Mhm.
so you're getting more into the chemistry. There's biochemistry, there's cultivation, there's the business side of it, there's supply chain management. I mean, who knew that there would be an industry that would actually make supply chain management exciting and appealing to young people? There's a lot of different things. I mean, you can get into cannabis law. There's so much. And we're pushing for more and more education also for healthcare professionals, because
Yeah.
right now there really isn't a lot. And that's a lot of what I've been doing in the past decade, is doing trainings in education, especially for, like, I've done some for UCSF palliative care pharmacology students, and also just palliative care professionals in general. But really having these conversations so that they can be knowledgeable and talk to their patients about it, so they don't do what I did when I was going through cancer. I went to a dispensary, I got a really strong drink, I took it, and then all of a sudden, I was super, super high. Couldn't have a good conversation with my doctor that day to talk about my chemo regimen. I was like, "Okay, I have to go home. I can't talk about this."
Mhm.
And then I went home and I bought myself a very expensive espresso machine on eBay, which means that you shouldn't shop high.
Shop high.
Don't do it, people. Um, but, there's a lot of opportunity, and, one of the things that I think is really good is really understanding the business side of it. Like, for myself, how I got into it, I was working in civil rights, I was middle management. After I got sick and was recovering, I was going back to school, and the dispensary that supported me through my cancer journey actually was like, "Hey, Sarah, are you looking for work?" And I likened it to working at a bookstore or a coffee house, because I'd never had a fun job like that. I'd always had serious jobs all through college. Um, and so I took it. It ended up being, of course, as you can see, is much more than that.
Yeah.
But it also, like, working with a lot of people, and there's a lot of things that when we talk about cannabis and the way people react to it, there is how the majority of human beings will respond. Like, I can pretty much tell you how most people will respond, and there are always anomalies. And it's also very nuanced. Like, when somebody would come in and say, "Hey, I'm having problems with sleep. My friend found this great chocolate covered blueberry that you sell that helps her sleep. Can I get that?" And I'll say, "Great. That's the conversation starting. But let's talk about you. How do you respond to, other pharmaceuticals? How do you respond to, and even though there's not really a parallel, but how do you respond to alcohol? Like, what's going on with that? And starting with a very small amount and working your way up to what works well for you. But a lot of things that I've been seeing, like, we're a very nascent industry, and the people who have been in it for a while are very knowledgeable about cannabis, but they may not have a lot of, like, the business skills, or things like marketing and different things that they need. So we had a lot of professionals coming in from other industries lending their skills, but they may not have an understanding about the science of cannabis or the psychological patterns of the consumer. Like, it actually is a very personal and emotional thing for people to pick things that work well for them. And, it's not unlike how wellness is, the wellness industry. And I mean, one of the things that we've been having more conversations about is the fact that, a lot of these cannabis companies came in. They're run by investors who only thing that they understand is that there's this supposed green rush. The green rush is
Mhm.
over.
Right.
Unless you've been, selling and worrying about the law, you're not going to. This is a consumer packaged product, just like anything else now, is highly regulated. But they think cannabis sells itself. They basically cater to what their idea of the stereotypical stoner is. And what they don't understand is that there's a lot of people who could be using it for wellness, using it without euphoric effects, or maybe just like a light lift and feel. Like for myself, people ask me, do you smoke cannabis during the day? I don't. I smoke it at night. For me personally,
Mhm.
THC is very distracting. It's something that I'll use to relax with, or if I'm working on something creative. But to, be writing articles, doing podcasts, being in committee, that's not something that fits in well for me. I do, however, use a non-euphoric cannabinoid for focus called CBG or cannabigerol. And cannabigerol is known as the mother cannabinoid because all cannabinoids develop from CBG. It's completely non-euphoric. It's really good for focus, and it actually helps calm me down because I have a lot of different things I'm working on and going on my head, and my brain moves really, really fast. So sometimes if I have a long list of stuff to do, I get, I kind of freeze and I'm like, "Ooh, where do I
Mhm.
start?" But using CBG as a tool to help calm my mind and create focus, I'm like, "Okay, a bite at a time. Let's get this done." And before I know it, I've got all these things done and my body has created a really nice dopamine rush naturally
Right.
because I've just achieved a bunch of things. So there's a lot of ways to look at it, and it's not all about euphoria, and I think that's one of the biggest things. There's nothing wrong with euphoria. Our society, I think, especially coming from a puritanical standpoint, we have a lot of shame about enjoying things and feeling good, and we feel like we
Mhm.
always have to, like, crunch and rush and work.
Yeah.
But there's also, and so I'm not knocking euphoria by any stretch of the imagination, and THC as an analgesic and something to calm is also very, very important. But there's also a lot of ways that we can use it that are non-euphoric that just actually help create balance in our bodies.
I love that kind of picture, being able to, use a little bit here and know how you're going to react and have the time and space and, create that world where, okay, now I'm going to smoke or I'm going to, do a gummy. But most people don't have that understanding, or they don't know all the different products and how they're going to react to them. And I mean, if you just go to a dispensary, like I would love to go to a dispensary and talk to someone like you and say, okay, here's the issues that I think I could really use, and I want to trust that. And I've bought gummies before, and I'll just nibble a little bit because I'm just really worried that I'm going to take a little bit and then it's going to be too much, and then I'm back in, I can't think, or I have to pick up my son at work and I can't, I don't know how I'm going to react if it's 4 hours from now or something. So, how do we get that kind of personal understanding? Can we get it from a dispensary? And what are the questions that we should ask when we go?
Well, that's all really real. I totally feel that. And I think, and this is not to disparage the bud tenders because there are some really wonderful, intelligent people that are working at a retail level. One of the things that I also started to realize going back from being middle management to being in retail is that people make assumptions when you work in a consumer facing job that you're not very smart and that this is all you can do. And
Mhm,
I worked with very intelligent people that, had degrees and some that didn't.
mhm,
Really passionate about their work. But the fact of the matter is that the training in dispensaries is not at the same par as it was when I was doing training and education for people. So
mhm,
your mileage may vary. There are still some really good places where they're engaged and they do great training programs, and the professional development is such that their staff actually, go after further education. So it's really about identifying, a dispensary in your area where they champion that, and they're not just about selling you like what's on sale, or if they're vertically integrated selling their brand. And a
mhm,
lot of it is talking. I mean, word of mouth goes a long way. Talk to your friends who use cannabis and ask them, where do you go that you feel like you're the most informed and that you can have a conversation about it? I also like to look and see if they have any sort of educational materials, available on their website. In Oakland, there's a dispensary that I really like called Rooted in the 510, and the owners actually came from Harborside, which had a rich background of community support and education. And when I went in there, because I was writing an article about them, I was talking to some of the staff, and they were all super engaged, super knowledgeable about the products, were able to answer a lot of questions, and you could tell that they were genuinely excited about what they were
Mm-hmm.
working. And if you're somebody who's kinda curious, that's the kind of place that you wanna go and get the support that you need.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, for me in my consulting work, I work with individuals and, individuals and their physicians to help, make a good fit. I'm not a healthcare provider by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm an excellent navigator, and I'm able to get people to understand the science and figure out how to create that safe container for experimentation to have successful outcomes. But I think the biggest thing with that is, when I did work in a dispensary, I would have people who would wanna use it. They'd say they tried it and it didn't work. A lot of times they would open up a bag of product and just dump it in front of me and be like, I say, "Well, what happened?" He said, "I don't know. All I know is it didn't work." And so there's a process for us to figure out what works well for us. And
Yeah.
it seems really basic, but when you're in the midst of it, it doesn't always occur to you. The way you react to cannabis is going to, like I said earlier, we're walking chemistry experiments. How you feel that day, what your hormone levels are like, where you are in the aging process all comes into play. So before you use a product, take a moment to do just like a quick body scan. Like in this day and age where we're rushing from moment to moment, we lose touch with what's going on in our bodies, and we just tend to like, let's get it done. Let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
Take a moment to focus and see how you feel. Write down a couple notes. It's not like writing a novel, just think about how you feel. Then keep track of what you used and how much you used of it, because whether it's legalized or not, we need to be aware of our dosages. It's just like, think about, alcohol is legal, but that doesn't mean that we just drink a pint just because it's legal. You will be, if you take too much cannabis, you won't die. You might be miserable, but it will pass. And, you know, if you do take more than you need, I always say, one, get comfortable. Two, forgive yourself. It happens. And have some water. Have a little bit of a sugary snack or something to help downregulate it. And if you have any CBD products, those can be really helpful for downregulating some of the uncomfortableness of euphoria. But when we look at products, think about like what you want to use it for, how long you want the effects to last, because the different modes of use have different levels of or different lengths of time that you have the feel. Like one of the fastest ways to not only feel the effects, but to have it pass is through inhalation.
Mm.
Then we get into things like sublinguals, like tinctures that are, accessed through the mucous membrane, but also through, the digestive system. And you have a window of time of feel for about 3 to 4 hours. Edibles are going to be 4 to 6 hours, which can be really helpful for if you're having problems with sleep, or you just want to have like a really like sparkly, giggly day, or for things like pain management. And as you use your product, like I said, record what it is, record how much you use, and as you start to feel the onset of the effects, make note of how quickly you're feeling it, because we all metabolize differently, especially with things like edibles. And then, on a scale of 1 to 10, you know, see how you feel about it, like make a mark about it. And also note what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it, what you wish would have happened. And then you have a lot of information to bring to your dispensary the next time you go, and you're giving them information so that they can help you, because chances are if that person has been at the dispensary for a while, they've gotten a lot of feedback from
Mm.
people. And so they see patterns. If they're an engaged cannabis professional, they'll see patterns and they'll be able to make other recommendations for you. And
Yeah.
that would be, my biggest bit of advice around that, because it's an interesting thing to find out your sweet spot. Like I had the luxury of, and I still do, of having access to lots of different products. Like I actually I work as a cannabis critic as well, so I get a lot of
Mm.
products. sent to me, and I
Okay.
do.
Samples.
Yeah. And, and for me, like, not everything works well with my body. Like, a lot of things that we would categorize as sativa, actually make me a little bit anxious, but I like things that are more middle of the road. I feel like hybrids or things that are a little drowsier. But there are some uplifting flowers that work really well for me because they may have CBD or CBG in them that helps kind of balance
What are flowers?
buds,
Oh, the
weed.
buds. And I got it. Right. Right.
'Cause a lot of times people think that it's the leaf because we always see the cannabis leaf,
Yeah.
but it does have, like, some stuff in it, but really, like, you'd have to smoke a lot of that to get any sort of feel whatsoever. It's the flowers, the buds that have the highest concentration of cannabinoids, and when you look at those buds, you'll see these they look like little sparkly crystals. Those are actually what contain the majority of cannabinoids.
It's like the little nectar or whatever, the sap that comes from. So, okay, let me see if I can kind of put this in a little package for people. This is what I'm getting out of it. Number one, if your brain hasn't stopped growing, you take that into account that it can be doing things to your brain that maybe are not fully understood. And I would put in the category things like memory, how you form memories, or whether you have more of a intense reaction perhaps to something that you've taken. But just be careful if you're under 25, because your brain will go until you're 25 about using it all. And then
I
yeah,
I
go ahead.
I think what I would say to that, because there have been studies that have shown that cannabis, especially with CBD, can be a neuroprotective. It's not
Uh,
gonna be great. It's not gonna hurt your long-term memory. It can affect your short-term memory. And because we see um, a lot of the things that happen with chemical imbalances in the brain pop up in our early 20s,
mhm.
if you have a genetic predisposition to something, you're going to want to be careful about your cannabis use when you're younger. Wait and see what happens.
Right. So some of the stories about, cannabis psychosis and all that's because somebody perhaps had an inclination to, or genetic inclination to schizophrenia, for example. And then that might be a trigger, one of the many kinds of triggers that can trigger uh, a psychosis or a schizophrenic episode. My guess, that's my understanding. But I
It's
think that is that fair?
it's better to be safe. The jury's still out on it. There's still a lot of research that's being done, but I
Like,
think
just
that
don't mess with it, I guess. It's like, just don't mess with your brain. If you have any doubts, don't mess with your brain.
exactly.
But I think the other things, if I were to kind of encapsulate the what you were just talking about, how to use, there's kind of two sides to it. One is recognize that you're taking a medicinal substance and have respect for that. And just like you wouldn't just like take 50 aspirins or, take a whole handful of antihistamines or whatever, you need to know how it's going to react to you. And because it has a psychoactive component to it, it's about your feelings too, which is, the kind of, to get us back to the original conversation. Yes, it's going to make you feel something. So be respectful of that. And as a medicine. But I also see that there's a ritualistic aspect to it that we've lost. And I smoke. I don't smoke a lot, but I smoke cigarettes. So I'll have like one or two a day, and I do it ritualistically because I don't want to just destroy my body completely, but I enjoy it. I love. So I take a walk with the dogs, and I have a half a cigarette. I break them in half. I spend so much money on cigarettes because I don't smoke. I break them, I have a little bit of it. But if that's about as close as I can get to kind of ritualistically doing it. And I think we should be approaching whatever substance it is with that kind of respect for it. That the idea that we're just like, oh, I'm going to, like how I smoked weed, which is I'm just going to skip school and sit in the back of the the grocery store where, we just stole a bunch of Vienna sausages or whatever. I mean, I swear that's for real. Stole a bottle of gin so we can sit back there and smoke weed and that's not ritualistic. That's rebellion. That's a bunch of other stuff. That's escape. And so I think that's how I'd like to see it, that there's a medicinal and a ritualistic process. And then I think the final thing is that we somehow as human beings need it in some way. We need to get an escape from the constant thinking or the stress in our bodies. And cannabis seems to offer that. And let's not abuse it. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that mindful, thoughtful use can create balance. And, I think especially for young people, there can be this stigma around having a low tolerance. Like, there's something about, oh, I mean, because I remember even back when I was younger around drinking, oh, they're weak. They've got, a low tolerance. Oh, I just lost my
Oh,
light.
you're right.
Um, but it
Did your
actually
power go out? No, I guess not.
no,
Oh,
my light just went. Um, but there's something to be said for, you know, just a little is enough.
yeah.
That's more than enough.
Yeah.
And keeping it low and just being really mindful about your use. It's just so important.
So if there's any rules that you can come out with this whole conversation is use as little as possible to get what you're looking for. And there's no need to go
Goes
overboard.
a long way. Yeah, you
Yeah.
don't want to overflood your system. Having a higher tolerance, like when people will say to me, "Oh, I have such a low tolerance." I'm like, "Do you understand how much money you save?"
Yeah, that's right.
If only that. But also just really like being aware that, don't jump the shark on it. Like
Mm,
there's to have a little bit and to get to that mindset that you need. It doesn't take a lot. And if your tolerance is going up, you may want to consider taking a tolerance break. It's a healthy thing to do.
mhm. Yeah, that's another thing that I think has come up with a lot of young people is that they don't realize how much time they spend buying, finding a time or place to smoke or do or use whatever, recovering so that they can go off and do like school or work or whatever. And that's a big part of your day. And if you find that you're taking hours and hours to do this little thing that you do, and I think you've got it organized in a nice way where you figure out what you need. Like, here's a task I'm going to be working on. This might work for this task, and here's the time when I'm going to relax. So this is what's going to work for the relaxation. And I think that's something that happens with maturity. It's like just like drinking. Sure, you want to drink at 10 a.m., but you realize that'll waste my whole day because I'll be a nothing blob. I'll go to sleep or I'll want to keep drinking forever. And then I'll really feel bad the next day or whatever. So we
Yeah,
learn. All right. I'm just going to give you a couple of little fast questions before we go
totally.
that I have been asked to
Oh,
ask you. Why is it that there are so many crappy tasting gummy products out there? Why can't they find some other way to deliver it besides the gummies?
well, I think with the gummies, it's really about, the industry latching onto something where they're like, "Oh, people like gummies. We'll just make a bunch of gummies." That's it's kind of laziness on the
Mm.
industry, quite honestly. I mean, it's like they say, "Oh, it's one of the highest selling products." It's like, well, it's
What
one
else
of
is there? Right?
yeah.
Either smoking it or I guess there's the tinctures. Okay, quick question number 2 is if you are having a bad high, you're having a bad trip, how do you get yourself back down from it before you feel like, because I literally had friends like call me, I think I'm going to call an ambulance. I'm so high, like I can't handle it.
Yeah,
What
that's
do
it.
you
Well,
do?
I mean, first know that you're safe. You're safe. 2, forgive yourself. I always say that. 3, have a little something to eat. Like have a little have like a sugary drink or something like that because that tends to take down the high. You're not going to get rid of it. So get comfortable. Also, if you're comfortable with using CBD, and I have to say, people talk about CBD, doctors recommend it more than anything else because they're like, oh, it's non-euphoric, it's this, is that. There is a small amount of the public that is sensitive to CBD, and it can cause, a general malaise, or it can actually create more anxiety if your body's sensitive to it. By and large, most of us aren't, though. CBD products can downregulate some of the uncomfortable effects of a high. My husband had a little bit too much cannabis one night when we were first dating, and I had a high CBD ratio pen with me, and I said, just take a hit off of this. And he's like, wait, I just had too much cannabis and you want me to have more?
I'd
This
be so scared.
makes sense. And I was like, really? Because I keep that in my purse when I go to events and I see someone looking uncomfortable. He took a little hit of it, and all of a sudden everything calmed down, everything was better. And I think some of that has to do with the fact that as we, as the illicit market grew and we started like really doing the race to the top with THC, and we're still doing it today, CBD is naturally occurring in cannabis, and it's normally like part of the component. It was got constantly getting bred out of it. And so now when people are like, the stuff that people are smoking now is way stronger than I remember when I was younger, it's because it's changed a lot.
Yeah.
Reintroducing CBD into your body during those times can help downregulate some of the uncomfortable effects and get you in a comfy place. It's not going to totally get rid of the high, but it will make it more manageable.
And you say you're safe because you can consume. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to break through to the second or third or fifth dimension. You're not going to suddenly see the Matrix and then be stuck in it. Like none of those things are going to happen. You're
Stroke
going to be
out,
okay.
you're not gonna have a heart attack. Like, it's fine. Your
Yeah,
perception is making you feel like something bad is going to happen. But nobody
it's
has
not true.
ever died from just cannabis.
Yeah.
They never. And that's, I actually, when I worked in the dispensary, I got a call from somebody one day, and she's like, I took too much. I can't breathe. I'm like, well, okay, so calm down. You can breathe because we're talking.
Right.
Okay. I know
Right.
you feel that way, but you're panicking and it's making your chest tight. So we're all right. I'm like, are you home? Put some jammies on, put a pleasant movie on, get on the couch, grab a blanket. I said, and get something to eat. And then she said, oh, pizza. I'm like, girl, you're gonna be fine.
There you go. Order a pizza and drink some water and get on the couch. I
That's
love
it.
that. Well, it's funny, just a little quick aside. There was a period of time in my life where I became the person people called when they were having a bad acid trip. And I would walk people through. And the first thing I would do is say, don't worry, you're going to be okay. I got this. And I would just
Yeah.
leave me phone calls, like someone from LA, friend of a friend would call, I hear that you can help me.
No, that
So,
friend. I know who to call
yeah,
now.
exactly. I will talk you down and everything will be all right. So the final question I have is, do you ever get the munchies? And if you do, what do you have? What's your
You
thing?
know? Yeah, I do. Usually I like sweet. Well, no, I don't. I was gonna say usually I like sweet, but that's my husband. Usually I like savory. I like
Mm,
things like crackers and cheese and things like that. But here's the thing. If you like cannabis but you don't like the munchies, there are a couple things you can do. One, if you want something that's more creative and, a little uplifting, THCV actually doesn't create the munchies. And that's in a lot of land races, which are some of the legacy cultivars that are a little bit more uplifting. Secondly, you can prepare for it, because what it is your taste buds
mm,
are activated.
mhm.
So neutralize your palate before you use your favorite cannabis product. Oftentimes that can help with the munchie. So brush your teeth, brush your tongue,
Oh,
brush
interesting.
your
Hmm.
mouth, and it can help with it. But yeah, I'm a like a cookie and crackers sort of person. Like, I like I like good cheese, so I like a Cowgirl Creamery Red Hawk on
Oh yeah. Hmm. Cowgirl
water.
creamery stuff. Yeah. But
Yeah.
then you get really thirsty. Then you get dry mouth. I remember the
Well,
cotton mouth.
you always have to have a good beverage with you. That's a must.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's your beverage of choice? I mean, it's not water, is it? Or is it like something bubbly or?
I like a good, like, sparkly water with maybe, like, a little juice in it. That's my jam.
Hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
not much of a soda person. I drink a lot of water. And, if it's on the weekend and I'm having it, I like to have it with coffee. I'm a
Oh,
fan of
mhm.
that.
So like a wake buzz, but yeah.
Yeah, awake,
Yeah.
chill. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, okay, wait, there was one more question I had. Uh, okay. If someone were to say to you, let's just get back to our original story, that they use weed when they feel bad,
Mhm.
what would you say to them about that?
I'd say it's only one part of the equation. It's one of those things where a substance isn't going to change your situation. It can temporarily change your state of mind, but you have to be realistic about the path. I mean, if you're just having a stressful day and you need something to take the edge off, that's one thing. If you're using it as something that gets you through all of your days, you need more tools in your toolkit.
Mhm.
I had a patient back in the medicinal days that came up to me, and this is an extreme story, so, but I use it as an example. He had a syringe of concentrate because, there's no needle in it. It's just an easy way for somebody to dose out the measurements. He put it on the counter. He was an older gentleman. He looked at me and he said, "I used cannabis to get myself off of hard drugs," which is a common thing.
Mm.
Getting off of pharmaceuticals and hard drugs, cannabis can be a very helpful tool with that. And he looked at me and he said, "This isn't getting me high anymore."
Oh,
And I looked at him and I said, "This is a tool. It will not fill a hole. It is a
yeah.
tool. You need to you need to talk to somebody. You need to get, you know, you have to gather a lot of different ways of being able to help pull yourself out of whatever it is that's making it hard for you to have good relationships with substances, but cannabis alone is not going to help you with that.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
one spoke in the wheel of the tools that you need."
Well, I always try to remind kids that listen to this. There are 6 things that we all need. We all need to be safe. We
Mhm.
need a relationship with one other person who cares for us. And that may not be a parent, that may be an older sibling or a teacher or somebody else outside of your home. You need coping skills, and cannabis might be a coping skill. But if it makes you feel bad today and worse tomorrow, or if it makes you feel great today and terrible tomorrow, it's not a good coping skill. So
Yeah,
think about it that way.
absolutely.
Next, you need to have help building your confidence, and you need someone to help you with that. And you need to belong somewhere, and you need to talk about the things that happen to you. Don't keep them inside. Talk and find that connection with somebody who is experiencing what you've experienced or has, or someone you can trust. And you have to go through the little, contact list in your head until you find that person, and they may not even be the right person, but keep trying and you'll find somebody who's there for you.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, like going back to the story of when I was younger and coming from a chaotic home, cannabis in those ways helped me understand like how much stress I was under, and I didn't understand what it was like to be relaxed because when you're
Mhm.
constantly on alert, it's just your state of being. But another thing that helped was I had an auntie that was really a big support for me, and she saw me, and she was able to help, and I was able to have some of the conversations that, sometimes things that happen in our families, we don't feel comfortable talking to people outside of our family, but I was lucky to have a family member to be able to support me and be like, "It's you're not alone.
And
It's."
and and did she reach out to you, or did you have to find the words to reach out to her, or did it just organically happen? Because I think that's an issue, that there might be someone in a young person's life that they're like, I admire that person, I like that person, but I don't want to talk, I don't want to tell them what's going on with me.
Yeah, it can be hard. You can feel like, there's fear of rejection or being a
Mhm.
burden. My auntie and I had a good relationship. She would come and get me and we would do things on the weekend together.
Mhm.
And so I broached the subject with her. She didn't bring it up with me. I can't say that she was surprised. I mean, she was a little bit, but she understood that people go through things, especially, in your immediate family. Um but she was just a really she gave me some sound advice, and more than that, somebody who would listen. You
Yeah.
know, you just need that. It's super important. So, if you don't have that, find find yourself an adult mentor that will be comfortable there, because they are out there.
Yeah, and they want to be there for you. They really do. There are so many people that it makes their day, it makes their week, it makes their life to know that they were there for somebody else, and present yourself so that they can help you. And if that's not the right person, go find someone else. But most of the time your gut's going to tell you who's the right person. So
That's it. And then when you get older, if you've got the capacity for it, pay it forward.
thanks as always for listening. And please don't forget to subscribe. You can find us everywhere online at bbgtv.org. That's our website. You can find us on YouTube, bbgtv.org, on all the podcast platforms. I want to let you know that there's a new podcast that's coming out by Bounce Back Generation, and it's called It's Interesting You Say That. And that's where Tyler, who is popularly known on social media as Jogging Turtle, and I have conversations about a wide range of really timely topics. We've done 2 episodes so far. The first one was about the election, and I was shocked to find out that one of us is a Trump supporter. And it's not me. We also talk about relationships in episode 2, the future of relationships. And in each one of those episodes, what we really strive to do at the end of the conversation is to come up with some guidelines, some helpful tips and advice on how we can approach these subjects. We also talk about AI and the future of work, something called emotional labor, and the value of that. Being a human being in a world that is emerging that's full of technology. Wherever you find us, please like, subscribe, follow us. We want you to be part of the Bounce Back Generation community. So I hope you'll join us, and thank you again for listening.